So if this were to be a topic to take home, blood would be it. This would be the one that easily could be a take-home item as far as a topic. So we'll just go over the basics. So why do we need blood? Well, we need it to carry gases, nutrients, get rid of waste, okay? Hormones use the bloodstream in order to travel from one place to another. Your blood carries heat, so it can help regulate your body temperature. It can bring B and T lymphocytes to where they need to go, different lymphoid organs. Okay. We'll talk about specific blood cells that participate in inflammation, in blood clotting. Okay. Your blood helps regulate the fluid levels in your body because, again, the heart's a miraculous pump, but it's all based on pressure. So you have to have blood pressure in order to move fluid through the system, right? Okay, so circ, blood, super important. Okay, so blood, we already know from lab, is a connective tissue, okay? So the extracellular matrix of blood consists of plasma. So it's a liquid extracellular matrix, right? So plasma is going to be anything that's just clear on the slide that you're looking at, which you've already looked at under the microscope. So now, amongst the erythrocytes, which are the red blood cells, are scattered white blood cells, which are called leukocytes. And then we have these little cell fragments, okay, that aren't true cells, that are called thrombocytes. And thrombocytes are involved in what?
Clotting.
Blood clotting. Yeah, thrombocytes, you can also call them platelets. Same thing. Okay. Okay, so blood plasma, 90% water, but we've still got some proteins in there. And there's three main ones that I want you to know. The first one is called albumin, and it basically gives plasma a little bit of thickness, a little bit of viscosity to it. Okay. Fibrinogen is a protein that's involved in blood clotting, which is important. And then globulins are important because they carry antibodies. And they can also transport fats and some ions, like iron and copper. Okay. All right. Okay, so when we talk about blood, we use the term formed elements because most blood cells are not true cells in that they can't all undergo mitosis. Okay, so most of them are post-mitotic, all right? Especially erythrocytes and platelets. Okay, so erythrocytes, red blood cells, lack nuclei and they lack organelles. And platelets are just cell fragments, so they're not true cells. So the only true cells in blood are leukocytes, the white blood cells. Those are the only ones. Okay, so that's why we have to make erythrocytes in our bone marrow. Okay, so from this picture, all I really want you to understand is hematopoiesis is the formation of blood cells, all blood cells, okay? And all blood cells come from, what a big surprise, stem cells, okay? Stem cells that are hanging out, waiting to be told what to do. So essentially all I want you to really know is what's circled in red here. So an erythrocyte, okay, so once a stem cell gets dinged by the body, you're gonna become a red blood cell. It starts to differentiate, okay? And right before it becomes a mature erythrocyte, it's called a reticulocyte, okay? So it's called a reticulocyte, and once that reticulocyte enters circulation, okay, so once it leaves bone marrow, and it enters circulation, then it's called an erythrocyte, okay? But it all originates from a stem cell. Monocytes, which are large ones, we'll look at these under the microscope in lab, okay? Monocytes, when they enter circulation, okay? Actually, I should say when they exit circulation. So when they enter circulation, they're a mature monocyte. They enter circulation. When they get where they need to go and they need to do their job, they exit circulation, because that's what white blood cells do. They have to exit circulation in order to do their job. When monocytes leave circulation, they become macrophages. So they become the garbage trucks that resorb and get rid of debris and trash and bacterial cells and viral cells and things that need to be resorbed by the body. Okay. And then the last example is platelets. And platelets are basically cell fragments, little pieces that are coming off this huge cell called a megakaryocyte. So the body tells the stem cell, you're going to become a megakaryocyte. And so, okay, fine, it starts to differentiate, it starts to mature. And then once it becomes a megakaryocyte, little pieces are going to be stripped off of it, and those cell fragments are going to be called platelets and be involved in blood clotting. Okay. Okay, so that's it for this. Okay, so our blood is mainly red blood cells. Okay, we've already acknowledged that under the microscope. So red blood cells are the most numerous. Okay, there's more in males than females. You don't have to memorize the number. Okay, but hematocrit is a term used when you want to know what percentage of your blood volume is red blood cells. That's your hematocrit. Okay. Again, men slightly larger than women. You don't have to memorize the numbers. Okay. So, interestingly enough, if they take a vial of your blood, throw it through a centrifuge, okay, red blood cells weigh the most, all right? 45% of your whole blood is going to be red blood cells. The remaining 55% is plasma. And less than 1% is going to be white blood cells, which is interesting. Like, okay, thought we would have a little bit higher percentage of white blood cells. But again, shows you how important red blood cells are for oxygen carrying capacity in the body. Okay, so erythrocytes can carry oxygen because they have a protein called hemoglobin associated with it. Hemoglobin can carry oxygen. It can also carry carbon dioxide. Okay. So hemoglobin structurally is basically like 4 chains coming together with iron. Okay, so with iron molecules. So because of this conformational like architecture of hemoglobin, okay, one red blood cell, so one erythrocyte, can have 250,000 hemoglobin proteins on it. And each of the 4 units can carry an oxygen molecule. So that means that 250,000 times 4, one red blood cell can carry 1 million oxygen molecules, which is pretty amazing. And that's why red blood cells ditch their organelles and their nuclei to give them more surface area to carry oxygen. Okay? They're more flexible when they're going through those capillaries, single file. Okay? Like remarkable. So again, if people are iron deficient, what's that condition called?
Anemia.
If you're iron deficient, you are anemic, right? Mm-hmm. So you're anemic. And that's not good because you need iron. So they usually either give you medications or tell you, hey, you need to start eating iron-rich foods like, meat and whatnot. You need natural iron in your body all the time. Okay, so red blood cells live a couple months. We know they originate in bone marrow. We know they ditch their nucleus and their organelles. They're biconcave in shape, which means that they have divots on both sides, and again, that increases surface area. Interestingly enough, they don't even use aerobic respiration. They use glucose. They carry 1 million molecules of oxygen, but they don't even use it for themselves, which is interesting. They use glucose. And there are certain protein types that are found on your red blood cells, and that's what gives you your blood type. All right. Okay, so if hematopoiesis is the formation of all blood cells, what is erythropoiesis? Formation of erythrocytes, right, the red blood cells. Okay. So when you're a fetus, like early stages of existence, okay, you start making red blood cells in what's called a yolk sac, all right? Then as you grow up until birth, okay, so this is later parts of fetal development, right up until birth, your liver and your spleen, which we already know now, start making red blood cells for you, okay? But once you're born, that stops. And what takes over is your red bone marrow of your bones. Okay, we know we have the appendicular skeleton and we have the axial skeleton. But interestingly enough, as we start to age, okay, at around maybe 40 years or more, okay, the rate at which your appendicular skeleton makes red blood cells goes way down to almost nil. And it's only your axial skeleton that continues to make red blood cells for you for the remainder of your life. Okay, so those vertebra, sternum, ribs, they're kind of important now because they're the ones that make your red blood cells. Your appendicular skeleton says, no, not anymore, we're done. Like, okay, a little concerning, but we can do it, we can do it. Okay, so white blood cells, we know, true cells. So they got the nuclei, they keep their organelles. So they have they're much larger in size because of that, but they also, they don't last as long. So there's a constant turnover. You're constantly making white blood cells in your bone marrow. Okay, but again, they have an immune function, we know this. They function outside of the bloodstream, so they use the bloodstream as their boulevard to get where they need to go. And then they commit diapedesis, which is when they exit the bloodstream and do their job. And at what blood vessel level do they perform diapedesis? What blood vessel? Venules, right? Okay, we already talked about that. Okay. All right. Okay. So in lab, when we get to blood, we're going to identify different kinds of white blood cells under the microscope. So for now, when we looked at blood connective tissue, we just identified, okay, this is blood connective tissue, this is a red blood cell, this is a white blood cell, this little speck is a platelet. So when we come back during circulation, we're going to identify different kinds of white blood cells under the microscope. And white blood cells are organized based on whether or not they have granules in their cytoplasm. So they either have granules or they don't have granules, okay? And the different white blood cells are listed here. We're going to go over each one and what they're responsible for, okay? But the mnemonic that you're going to remember in order to remember which white blood cells are the most numerous and which ones are the least numerous is never let monkeys eat bananas. Neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and then basophils. So neutrophils are the most common, basophils are the least common. And you'll recognize that under the microscope because everyone's gonna be like, I haven't found a basophil yet. Where are the basophils? Like, is this a basophil? And I'm gonna look and I'm gonna say, no, it's a neutrophil, sorry. There's so many neutrophils. So basophils are gonna be harder to find under the microscope because they're the least numerous of the white blood cells. Okay? So let's talk just briefly about each one. We're just gonna do like a one-sentence summary. So neutrophils are basically the bacterial attackers, okay? If you get inflammation, the first cells in response to that inflammation are neutrophils. So the first guys. There are other cells that are involved in inflammation, but neutrophils are the first. They come in the first because they are the largest in number, right? They're the most common. Okay, So the yellow arrow is pointing to a neutrophil, right? It's kind of got a little speckled cytoplasm, trilobe nucleus. Again, you'll look at that under the microscope later in lab. Okay, for now, first line of defense and inflammation. So eosinophils also mediate inflammation, but they also are responsible for ending allergic reactions. Okay, so they're responsible for allergic reactions, and they're also responsible for parasites. Okay, so you go to a third world country or something and you pick up a tapeworm, eosinophils are probably gonna jump in and try and help you. Okay. Okay. Basophils, same thing, they're involved in inflammation. But these guys secrete two different substances. One's histamines, which again is involved in allergic reactions, but also heparin, which inhibits blood clotting because you don't necessarily want blood clotting in all situations. So it just depends on what's going on. But again, basophils are the least numerous, so they're going to be like the last ones to the party. So they carry kind of various generalized function. Okay, so those that we mentioned are granulocytes that have granules in their cytoplasm. Agranulocytes, again, lymphocytes, the most important cell in the lymphatic system. This big guy here, it just looks like a cell with a large nucleus in it. Okay, so we know that these lymphocytes are found in lymphoid tissue. They mount an immune response, nothing is new here. They act against a foreign agent. That foreign agent is called an antigen. Okay, so nothing really new here. We've already discussed all that. But what I want you to know, one step further, is that when we're talking about T cells and B cells, okay, T cells are in the thymus, B cells are in the bone marrow, they attack foreign cells differently, okay? So T cells mount a direct attack. They mount a direct attack on the cell, and they prepare it for cellular death, which is called apoptosis. But they basically punch the plasma membrane, infect the cell, and kill it. B cells don't. They do more of an indirect attack. So B cells, when they're getting ready to mount an attack, they convert themselves into what are called plasma cells. So they transition into plasma cells, and then plasma cells are going to secrete antibodies, and antibodies are going to be specific to certain antigens. Okay, so antigens are going to be present on pathological cells. It's basically a marker. It's like a flag that says, here I am, I'm not normal, but here's the flag that I'm presenting. And certain antibodies will respond to that flag and kill that cell, right? So that's why we have different antibiotics for different viral or bacterial infections, right? Because it attacks different antigens. So don't worry about all the MHC and all that, and it doesn't matter. So T cells, again, direct attack. They're just gonna plunge the plasma membrane and get it ready for apoptosis, and it's just going to shrivel up and die, and a monocyte, which has turned into a macrophage, is probably nearby, and it's gonna pick up the trash. Okay? B cells are going to turn into lymphocytes. Sorry, B cells are lymphocytes. They're going to turn into plasma cells. They're going to release antibodies. Antibodies are going to be specific to certain antigens, which are certain cells. Okay, so certain antibodies are going to latch onto certain cells, and that's going to tell the monocyte, which is now a macrophage because it's exited the bloodstream, to kill it. To kill it, eat it, get rid of it. So it's kind of a two-step process for B cells versus T cells, it's direct. Now, if we're talking about autoimmune diseases is where T cells come into effect. So T cells, if you have like a transplant, for example, your own natural T cells will automatically recognize that implant as not yours. And it will mount a response and start killing the implant, which is why people that have implants, okay, they have to take medications, basically to tell the T cells to stop, that this is okay, I've put a new organ in here to help me, but you can't attack it, essentially, okay? So I had a patient actually in the clinic years ago. He came in to me, gosh, I think he was in his early 20s in the beginning, and he came in for low back pain, came in for shoulder pain, you know, different aches and pains. But he, in talking to him and getting to know him, he told me that he was born with a faulty liver. So he knew that at some point he would probably need a liver transplant. And I'm like, God, you know, you're only 20 something, you know, at some point your liver's gonna head downhill, and your liver is your main filtering organ in the body. That's like, you know, a big deal. So, I don't know, maybe five-ish, 7 years later, it got to the point where he needed a transplant. So he flew out of state, he was on waiting lists and whatever, flew out of state, had the transplant, came back, and then came in to see me for generalized strengthening because he had lost so much weight and he was just so atrophied because he'd been laying in a bed the entire time, and just, you know, physical therapy was barely anything. So he came back to see me, I don't know, for probably a good year or more, just to get back on his feet, feel better, you know, be able to do some strength training, feel confident that he could go back into the gym, because now he's like in his 30s, right? So everything was going fine, blah, 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 taking all of his medications, and then over time, his T cells started to attack his implant, regardless of the medication. So they basically overrid the medication. So he came to a point in his life where he had to decide, do I do another implant or do I face the inevitable? And so he opted to do another implant. So he went through the whole process of getting back on the list. He got accepted for another implant. You know, he left the clinic. Said, okay, we'll see you on the other side. You know, good luck, second surgery. And he never came back. He didn't survive the surgery. So, again, it's just an example of what can happen, you know, when your body recognizes something as foreign when it shouldn't necessarily do that. Regardless of all the medication that you can give it, it can override that in order to think that it's protecting you, right? So, okay. All right, monocytes. We've already talked about these guys. Huge, big horseshoe-shaped nucleus. You guys will see that under the microscope later. But again, they turn into macrophages. They break things down. Garbage trucks break things down. Okay, we know that. Platelets, again, disc fragments coming off of a megakaryocyte, not MAGA, sorry, it should be megakaryocyte. Involved in clotting, okay? That's pretty much the deal. Don't need to know anymore.